All right, so welcome to another edition of the Deals for Dentists podcast. And today we have Brian Hanks. And Brian is an MBA and a CFP, dental accountant, and transitions expert. He's from Salt Lake City but works with clients nationwide. If you go to Deals for Dentists, you'll actually be able to get a free author copy of the book, How to Buy a Dental Practice. And normally it's $19.99, but they'll just cover. You just have to cover printing and shipping. Is that right?
That's right. It's usually $6 or $7, I want to say, maybe a few bucks extra if you're somewhere in a far reach like Alaska. But yeah, just a nice little bonus.
And also, Brian, if you go to Deals for Dentists, Brian has the Practice Purchase Blueprint, $300 off if you mention Deals for Dentists. This course normally sells for $997 online. Enter the code DEALS and you get 30% off, which is $300 off. So that is awesome. So the Practice Purchase Blueprint is your step-by-step guide to preparing and finding and analyzing and buying the right dental practice. So everything you need to know about buying the best dental practice is in that course. So first of all, you are an expert transitioner. Wait a second, no, it's 2020. So I just got to clarify that means you help dental buyers transition in their career, correct? I just wanted to get that straight.
Correct. Yep. I
Okay,
work,
good.
my only clients are dentists. I only work with buyers and I work nationwide. That covers it.
So you only work with dentists and only buyers. Um, and what about specialists? Is it only GPs or specialists as well?
Now, I've hit all the specialties so far, including some of the more obscure ones, and it's been fun. Each has their own little unique challenges and things to watch for, but in general, the principles are the same.
Yep. So you help me. Like a coach, you help me buy the practice. What if like 10 years later I want to sell? Will you help me out then, or is it
Let's
just
talk in
buying
10
only?
years. If I'm selling practices, then I'll let you know. But right
Gotcha.
now, how I got into this is I was doing dental accounting, I was doing dental financial planning, and I was helping the younger clients just because of my age. I'm still in my 30s, although that's rapidly coming to a close. And I was just noticing how poorly the buyers were represented in their situations. There's brokers out there that help the sellers, and traditionally, the only folks that have anything to do watching out for the buyers would be the bank, because they're the only ones that need to make sure they get paid back. And there's some good lawyers out there, some good legal help on both sides of the transition. But just the very beginning, Eric, is this a good practice to buy? Is the valuation fair? How much money am I going to make? Right? Very basic questions were not being asked and answered for buyers. And I just thought, this is crazy. So this is the niche I've set up, and I love it. I have a blast. Every day is a little bit different. And yeah, so, again, call me in 10 years. If I'm selling practices, I'll let you know. But right now I'm having so much fun with the buyers that's where I focus.
So that I was going to mention that word niche. This is a very kind of niche thing where you just you help buyers, but I feel like first I feel like there's three phases of a dental transition, and you probably know better than me. But I feel like the first phase is the decision to make that transition and be look for a practice and become a buyer, finding the right practice, then the whole process of that actual transition happening, all the the bank loans and all the paperwork that goes along with it, and then post transition after you've become the owner, that there's that's when the real fun begins. But so this is quite the niche that you have, where you're just focusing on dentists and buyers, because the decision to buy a dental practice and find the right one and all that goes along with it and the entire process can be the biggest decision of your life and the most stressful decision and process of your life. So having an expert like yourself kind of coach a young dentist through this is I think extremely important and helpful.
I put it right up there with who you marry and whether or not you have kids and where you live, right? There's very few things that impact your life on a day-to-day basis, the amount of money you're going to make, how happy you are in your career, than what practice you ultimately decide to work in, and if you decide to buy one or not. And
Hmm.
these days, the decision to buy a practice, if you read popular publications in the dental world, feels like, that question is up in the air. I'm here to tell you it's as big a no-brainer decision as it ever has been, but we
Hmm.
can maybe talk about why. But you nailed the general phases, right? There's the am I really going to do this phase? There's the okay, now how do I find one? And then okay, I found one. Now what do I do phase? And yeah, so I have some thoughts and suggestions on all three of those, and primarily where I help is that third phase.
So I just want to take one step back. You are a CPA and a financial planner.
So yeah, dental accountant and financial planner, doing taxes and doing financial planning, and lived that whole world. These days though, just doing the transitions. I haven't touched a
Hmm.
tax return in a few years. I don't have tax season anymore, so which is huge and nice. And then I keep the financial planning to just friends and family. So I'm not trying to sell or sell anything after the transition. I'm not trying to. This isn't an entree or an appetizer into a bigger entree. I'm not trying to sell
Hmm.
consulting services after the fact. It really just is the transition. And the downside for my business model is I'm always finding new clients, and there's never any recurring revenue. But I'm okay with that because I've been busy enough that it doesn't feel like a downside.
Yeah, that was the reason I was mentioning that is because those are pretty important credentials to have to really know the ins and outs of a dental practice, and if that dental practice is right for that buyer, because there is so much that goes into a dental practice. So you actually have two books, and they are very creatively called "How to Buy a Dental Practice" Volume One,
Yep.
and the sequel is "How to Buy a Dental Practice" Volume Two.
Yeah,
Is that
wait
right?
for it. What did I? Oh,
Yep,
volume two, right? Yeah,
Volume
well, it's
Two.
that accounting background showing through, right? Kind of a lack of
Mhm.
creativity, but hey,
It's right
seems
to
to
the
work
point.
well, and it's pretty obvious what the book's about.
Okay, so you have the books. You also have the course. Can you explain about the course?
Yeah, the course was an attempt. I had enough phone calls from people saying, and I get busy from time to time. So I'll have a phone call where someone says, hey, I found a practice. Can I hire you? And I say, gosh, I am totally full right now. I'm totally booked up. Here are some other resources. And they say, no, 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 no. I really want to benefit from your learning. I say, oh, well, gosh, what do I do with those people? Or the folks that maybe don't want to or can't afford the one-on-one coaching fee. I wanted to provide as much information as possible for someone to be able to do the entire process themselves, from all the way from that decision of, do I really want to buy a practice, and thinking through and showing the numbers, right? How much is this going to impact? What if I wait till I pay off my student loans? When should I buy? That whole process to finding a practice, which sneak preview is actually the hardest part of the whole process. And
Mm-hmm.
and we can talk a little bit more about that. To all right, a broker or a seller or somebody sent me some documents. I'm looking at a tax return. Now what do I do? Right? I mean, like, is this good? Is this bad? I have no idea. And I will take in this course buyers through an exhaustive set of examples with real practices, real numbers, to show them, all right, if you're looking at this kind of tax return, here's what you look for. And here's what you would, these are the types of details you're going to watch for. And here's what they mean. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, here's my spreadsheet that I use with my clients. It's yours. You can have it. You can input all the information in. And here's how you would analyze and get some insights from this whole process that you're going through, from production reports to accounts receivable aging reports to employee censuses and all this information that's going to get dumped on you. I wanted people to be able to have the option, at least if they didn't want to hire a one-on-one coach, to at least have some way to do it themselves, and have it be at a cheaper price point where, there you are, you've been out of school for a year or two, you've got your $400,000 in student loans, and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I don't know if I want to afford, and can I afford? The goal was to get this down to a little bit more affordable level, but
Mm-hmm.
still have all the same information.
Okay. And so I wanted to, I feel like every question now that I have has to have two follow-up questions.
Fire away.
Um,
That's good.
so every question I ask on my podcast, I have to follow up with how is it different post-COVID, and how does it compare to a DSO? Do you actually help dentists? Do you focus more on like the the kind of the mom and pop solo practitioner or multi-specialty practice, or will you help a buyer find a DSO if that's what's for them?
Yeah. So to answer your second question, we'll get to the COVID question in a second. But the second question of which buyers will I help? They're the more traditional solopreneur, single location doctors. Very frequently, I'll get a doctor who wants to buy into a partnership. Right. There's a group of 2 or 3 or 7 doctors who are now bringing on a new one because someone's retiring, and that new associate or younger dentist is trying to evaluate the partnership. Is this a good deal? So we'll do some of those. But I would say DSOs don't need me. They typically have someone like me internally that will analyze deals for them.
Okay.
So, yeah. But to your question about COVID, all right. So we're recording this. It's September 2020. We're coming out of the summer months and we're getting into the fall. And I have some very specific data that I can share with your audience about whether or not COVID has affected things and where things are going to go. All right. So I'll give you some opinions, and then I'll give you the data behind those opinions, and folks can just decide for themselves whether or not my opinions hold any value. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So my opinion is that if you are a buyer of a dental practice, there are 2 reasons why now is as good a time as any to buy. All right. The first reason has to do with math. The second reason has to do with supply and demand. All right. So here's the math argument. Let's say if it's you, September 2020, and you're trying to decide, gosh, the world sure feels scary. I'm not sure if now is the right time to buy a practice. Fair enough, right? That would be a very logical set of thought processes to go through. So if you think to yourself, maybe I'll wait a year, or maybe I'll wait 2 years till things feel a little bit more calm and a little bit more safe. Fair, okay? I have nothing wrong with that. Your feelings are valid. They make sense. But here's the math behind those feelings. As an associate, you're very likely making a percentage of your own production. As an owner, you're going to make that same percentage plus the profit from your own production, plus any hygiene profit that the practices come in and making. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. As an associate, you can go home and kind of turn off the practice. As an owner, you're always on, and there's, so there are some pros and cons, but the math would say, let's say you waited a year or 2 years instead of buying today. In my mind, based on the type of practice you find and buy, the amount of profit that you are foregoing by waiting a year or 2 is going to be a lot more than any potential price decrease or any potential softening in the practice transition market that you're going to see over that next year or 2. So essentially, in a very short version, I'm saying it doesn't make any sense to wait because you're going to make a lot more money as an owner.
I was going to say that's the real takeaway there is, as an owner, you're going to make more money and you can start chipping away at those loans.
Exactly. Yep. So that's argument number 2. Let me give you the supply and demand argument, my second argument. All right. So in September 2020, we are seeing a lot more sellers in the marketplace, and we're seeing fewer buyers. All right. So think about your basic econ 101, supply and demand curve with lines. And, if you ever took that class, anytime supply goes up and demand goes down, prices drop a little bit. All right. Now, what's causing supply and demand to shift? Well, supplies are going up. In other words, more practices are coming on the market in fall 2020 because enough sellers were on the fence. They were saying, I'm 68 years old. I'm just making good money. My health is good. Should I retire? Right? They're doing this mental thing, and they're doing it for years. And then along comes COVID and face masks and PPE, and they're saying, oh, forget it. I'm out of here, right? I'm selling my practice. I'm going to list this thing and get out of here, right? So you're seeing more sellers throwing in the towel, listing their practices. On the other side, what you're seeing are fewer DSOs in the marketplace for practices. All right, so I'm not talking about the big 900, 800 location DSOs. Those guys are still in the marketplace. What I am talking about is the two buddies from dental school that bought 6 locations. They're going for the 7th, and COVID hit. And they're saying, whoa, only locations 1, 2, 3, and 4 were profitable. 5 and 6 were still losing money, and we were looking at practice number 7. Forget practice number 7. Maybe we're going to list practices 5 and 6. So all these little small DSOs, the smaller versions of the big practices, they're not in the marketplace right now in as big in numbers as they used to be. So, you know, if you're a buyer, it just means you potentially have more options and you potentially have more power and negotiation room in a deal. Throw on that my math argument that you're going to make more money as an owner. And to me, it doesn't make any sense to wait as long as you can get over that mental fear of, you know, is the world going to end?
Also, if you're an associate and let's say there's another shutdown, you're out of a job. Right. If you're the owner, you know, there's a lot of stress with, you know, the lack of profitability, but you still have a job.
I say as an owner, your income can go down. As an associate, your income goes to 0.
Can go to 0. Yeah. It's so true and so scary. Yep. So quick, just want to back up. So really a DSO, the definition of a DSO is really, can it just mean more than one office? Is such a broad definition?
Right. Yeah. Any group of practices that share some expenses somewhere. And that's where you either have to be really, really, really big to benefit as a DSO or just be a solopreneur, because if you think about the average dental practice and their P&L, what shared expenses are there that you can really, really benefit from? Hiring? Maybe. Training? You know, a little bit. But for the most part, your practice needs to have someone at the front desk. It needs to have an assistant chair side. It needs to have some hygienists. Based on your specialty, you may have a little bit different mix there. But they're, you know, supplies, maybe ordering and getting a discount. How big is that discount going to be? You know, are you going to get a discount on rent because you own 10, you know, spaces? No, not much, right? Unless they're all owned by the same landlord, which is unlikely. So the math of DSOs is really interesting because, right, if the average practice has profitability somewhere in the neighborhood of 40%, okay, give or take. The average practice overhead is somewhere around 61.7, depending on which study and which numbers you read. So that leaves roughly 40 cents on every dollar for the owner of most dental practices. Well, that sounds like a lot. That's pretty good. That, you know, grocery stores would love that. General Motors would love that. Apple would probably get 40% or more, but dental practices are sitting pretty. The trick is that the doctor does most of the production, right? And they're going to want at least 30, probably more like 40% of their own production. And, you know, once you deduct that amount, there's something like 15% left for taking the risk of ownership of a dental practice, which is still good. Don't get me wrong. That's a good number. But as a DSO, if your DSO is taking 5, 6, 10, 12% of that 15%, are you really getting the value for giving up some of those profits by sharing the expenses of, I don't know, hiring your next front desk person, right? That's where the math gets tricky, and you need to have 900 locations in order for that to work.
Okay. So I wanted to just take a step back to kind of the, you know, in choosing to hire you as would you call yourself like a specialist or a coach or?
Yeah, the buyer's transition. I like the broker's buyer, buyer's representative, something like that. Yeah.
Now, I would say, you know, the first phase is, okay, I'm ready. I've decided. I've actually internally made the decision that I want to take the next step. How does it work? Do I give you a call and we start looking? Is that really finding that location? Just to go back even further, it's essentially a buyer's market right now. Is that right?
More so than it has been in the past, for sure.
which is opposite of the kind of the real estate market where we are. I'm in Massachusetts.
Right.
It's such a seller's market. Everyone's moving out of the city and going to the burbs. So you can't even buy anything. It's just everything's moving like hotcakes. But for the dental office, it's actually a buyer's market. So what's the first step? How do we take this journey together? Is it getting approved for a bank loan first? We find the location first.
The very first thing you need to do is be ready to own a practice. All right. So I'll give you 5 things you need before you can even, consider a purchase, or at least you need to have ready when you find a practice. And then the next step is to find a practice. So let me give you the 5 things first. All right. So you're going to need 5 things to be ready to buy a practice. And I'll go easiest to hardest. All right. So the easiest is you need a credit score over 680.
Mm-hmm.
Almost not a problem for any dentists out there. You need a good credit report, slightly different thing, right, than a credit score. But for most dentists, not a problem. The only folks that run into trouble here are folks that got caught in the real estate bubble with a short sale, or if you've had a bankruptcy in the past, that can be a problem. Okay, but for most folks, 680, good credit report, not a problem. All right. Next thing you're going to need is about a year's worth of experience. All right. This is, so if you're D3, D4 dental students listening to this, like, sorry, Gunners, 99% of you out there cannot buy a practice right out of dental school. All right. There are some exceptions. They get a lot of press. It can be done. You are probably not the exception. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. All right. So that's number 3. Number 4 is you need production history. Okay. You need a production history that shows you can do at least 80% of the production of whatever practice you're buying. All right. So you may be really excited. You've been out of school for a year or 2, and you're looking at this practice that's collecting $2 million, right? 500 grand in hygiene. The doctor's doing 1.5, and you're an associate in a little, mini DSO doing $300,000-$400,000 a year. Guess what? The bank has no idea whether or not you can reach what that seller was doing, right? You don't have to go 100%, right? The seller's probably a lot older than you, a lot faster, a lot more experience. So you don't need to be able to match the sellers, but you got to get close. And the caveat there, the asterisk to that 4th one is, the seller can't be doing major stuff that you can't do. Implants, Invisalign, all-on-4s, whatever. Okay. So that's 4. Let me give you the hardest one, the one that most people have the biggest struggle with. You got to have some cash. All right. The general rule is you got to have the lesser of 10% of the purchase price or $50,000 in liquid cash. All right. So I'll go over the math again, but let me tell you why you got to have the cash. You got to have that cash liquid, okay, available to use, but you're actually not going to hand it over to the bank. It's going to sit in your account. You're going to close on the practice. And after you close on the practice, it's still going to be sitting in your account, right? Savings account, checking account, CD, money market, things like that. IRAs, 401ks, your credit card, cash out that you could get, or home equity, things like that don't count. All right. So why this is so hard for people, and again, the rule is lesser of $50,000 or 10% of the purchase price, which for most folks, if you're looking at a decent practice, means you got to have at least 50 grand, right? If you're looking at a practice that's selling for 400, okay, 10% of that is 40 grand. But why that's tough for folks is because they're staring at that mountain of student loans and they're saying, oh my gosh, I can't wait to pay these down. So they make some money as an associate and they start chipping away at those student loans. Well, that's great. And the financial planner in me tips my hat to you. That's awesome. But you don't have any cash, or you have very little cash. And the bank wants to see that to know, A, you're a responsible dentist who didn't blow every dollar they made their first couple of years out. And B, that you could weather a storm like we've seen recently with COVID, right? If the practice gets shut down for some reason that had, nothing to do with you, could be a natural disaster, could be a pandemic. A client of mine had a flood, right? Showed up at the office on a Monday, had to wade through waist deep water, right? Everything in the office was destroyed. And I'm talking everything. Something like that happens, the bank wants to know you can pay them back and you can keep the staff on.
Hmm.
So those are the 5 things you need. You asked me like, what's the first step to get started? We can talk from there about finding a practice, but did that make sense? And is there anything I can clarify there?
Yeah, so I'm all those 5 things really. One of my questions I was going to ask you is when is the right time, and it sounds like you need at least a year.
Yeah.
Coming right out of school, you maybe have the cash, but you don't have the experience where you can't show that 80% of production. Um, and uh, does student loans affect your credit score at all? If I have $400,000 of student loans, will being a dentist, does the bank look at that and say, okay, this is pretty common. They're not going to mark that against me, but will that affect my score?
It won't affect your score too much as long as you haven't missed any payments. Okay.
Hmm.
But the bank will absolutely look at your balance and how much your monthly payments are. So a common move out of dental school is to consolidate and maybe even refinance those student loans, which can be great. Right? You might
Hmm.
be paying 6.8, 8.6% on your student loans. You want to bring that interest rate down. So you go to SoFi or DR Bank or somebody like that, and you refinance. The problem with that is now your payments are way up
Yeah.
compared to other student loan repayment options like income-based repayment, payee, some of these. So the direct answer to your question is student loans matter. They don't matter as much on the credit score, but the bank will take into account how much your payments are and whether or not the practice you're buying can cover those payments.
Okay. So you need at least a year of experience. Would you prefer, and do you recommend maybe 2 or 3 years?
Not necessarily. If you hustle and you really work hard on case acceptance, some basic CE, and some of those chair side skills, your hand speed, and those types of things, the folks that I've seen are roughly 12 months after they finished with education, they're in as good a shape as they are, roughly speaking, 2 or 3 years down the road. So in my mind, the bigger danger is waiting too long to buy a
Hmm.
practice rather than buying too soon. Some exceptions, by the way, to that 1 year rule would be military dentists. If you did a GPR AGD that had a significant number of cases that you're doing,
Hmm.
and specialists obviously are an exception to that rule as
Yeah.
well. But your basic dentist that didn't do any kind of residency, is just coming out of dental school, give it a year. But if you know you want to own, like have in your mind that 12-month mark as your mark to find something and move into it.
Okay, so you want to own, you made that decision, but what if let's say I've been a year out, but the type of office that I want to buy. So some people may like the hustle of having a Medicare HMO style of practice with that high volume. Um, Others may want that more kind of boutique, high end, fee for service, cosmetic type practice. And then there's kind of the mix in between where there's some PPOs, kind of the mix. Um, I guess, how do you know, what is the right type of practice for you until you have those years of experience and you've kind of, tried different types of dentistry?
You don't really, right? So that would be one argument in your favor of maybe waiting 2 or 3 years and
Hmm.
trying out different offices. In a perfect world, you come right out of dental school, you get a job in an office that has a similar feel to the one that you ultimately want to buy. You check
Hmm.
it out, it confirms what you thought, and then you buy a practice. In the real world, that may not happen, right? Or you may not have the option to work in private practice if you want to own a practice. Or a fiance or someone needs to finish school, so you're going to go get a job with a DSO in some other
Hmm.
city, not planning to stay there forever. So I mean, the real world exists, and um, you know adjust appropriately for your situation. But
Okay.
I will say, most folks, for most folks, the most common phone call I get is, "Hey Brian, it's been 8 years since I finished school. I should have done this several years ago, like 6 years ago, but I didn't ever get around to it. Now I found a practice and I'm ready to buy it. I'm saying, fantastic. You know, it's like planting a tree. The second best time was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So great. I'm glad you're doing it. But, you know, the bigger fear, the most common thing that I see is more of, I just never got around to it rather than, you know, life got in the way.
Well, you get into this groove, and I was one of those associates that I associated way too long, and I don't regret, you know, where I am today, right now, and I'm a partner, um, but I should have done it earlier, and you kind of get into this groove as an associate where you do your thing and you leave, and there's something really nice about that, where you do the dentistry, you try to hone your skills, and once you leave the office, you know, other than maybe getting a follow-up phone call, you leave the office. So for some people that may be the way to go, or you know, maturity wise, I was in diapers until I was 5. I was a late bloomer. I needed to mature. I don't think I would have been a great owner or leader, even the first 5 years out of school. But then again, when you buy the practice, it's really a wake up call, and you got to become a leader pretty quickly. So,
Yeah.
how do you factor all that in? Like, each personality of every dentist is different. Some people just may not be ready. Do you go through like an interview process to find out how they tick and what's the best situation for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll tell you what I do with folks that have called me. And then I do want to share some thoughts about whether or not you might be ready. All right. So if you're listening to this and you're not sure if you're ready to buy a practice, I have some encouraging thoughts for you. But let me tell you what I do with clients who call me. Clients who call me, we have an onboarding process where I talk to them about what they're excited about in terms of ownership and what makes them the most nervous. I also ask them, what are their non-negotiables, right? Is a non-negotiable that you have to live in downtown Boston? If yes, great. That helps me to know how to evaluate a specific practice. You're looking out somewhere along the Marathon Trail at what's the Wellesley, where all the girls kiss you along the way on the marathon, right?
Yeah.
No, you want to go live in Wellesley, great, but that's not downtown Boston. So why are we even talking about that practice, right? So they're definitely, and other non-negotiables might be stuff like money, the building type, partnership or not. I mean, there's a lot of different factors. One interesting one for me, I wouldn't have guessed before I got into doing this, was the overall technology level of the office. And that is, I mean, no joke, in the last 3 months, I have looked at several practices with people that have dark rooms with film. Okay. So those are out there. What I tell people is technology can and always will be upgraded throughout your career. So if it's in a geography you like, and it has the type of building you like, and the patient base is good and they're loyal and all those things, like, you can buy equipment. You know,
That's the
would
easy
it be
part.
better?
You can always buy
Yeah.
equipment. Yeah.
Equipment rep, they'll love you, right? And yeah, you could probably negotiate a little bit lower price if you're going to have to replace all the sensors and all the chairs and the cabinets haven't been updated and the shag carpeting and everything else, right? But anyway, so there is that onboarding process. Eric, do you mind if I share some thoughts about whether or not people want, you know, they're not sure if they want to be an owner?
Yeah, I think that's very important because, like you said, could be the biggest decision you make, and for some people, it may not be for them. But go ahead and take it from there.
Okay, so all right, I'm self-employed. I live near Salt Lake City, Utah, and last week, this is a true story. I cracked a molar. All right, so back left, it's cracked, it's sharp, it's bugging my tongue, and I need to get into an office, right? And I called. Now I'm right. Utah has a reputation for having a lot of dentists, and it's absolutely accurate. Within a 2-mile radius of my house, there are 22 dental offices on Google Maps. Okay. So I work in the industry. I have a sense of, you know, when I hop on Google Maps or when I'm searching for what types of offices I want to look for. And I'll tell you why this is relevant here in a second, but this is how the story goes. 22 offices. I have an immediate need and I'm self-employed. So here's what I said. All right, I'm going to call all of these offices and I have 2 questions. All right. Because we've needed to get a new dentist anyway. We just moved to our home that we're in. And I've got a family of 6. My wife and I, 4 kids. We need a new dentist and I'm paying cash. All right. I have 2 questions. How fast can you get me in?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have some kind of in-office membership plan?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Those are my 2 questions. All right. Not what are the details of your in-office membership plan. It's just yes or no. Do you have an in-office membership plan? And that's just because I read, dental economics and dental town. And I know like there's probably some benefits to me paying cash and having an in-office membership plan. I just want to know those 2 things. How fast can you get me in? And whether or not, you have a membership plan. No joke. 22 offices. Eric, I'll let you guess. How many actually picked up the phone 10 a.m. on a Tuesday? Middle of the week, 10 a.m. How many would you say even picked up the phone?
I mean, it should have been all 20, but I have a feeling you're going to say it's like 2 or yeah.
Okay. To their credit, it was greater than half. It was 12.
Okay.
Okay. 12 out of 22 picked up the phone. So slightly more than 50%. So already 10 offices are just off the table, right?
Yeah.
10 a.m. on a Tuesday and you can't even pick up the phone. Why would I come to your office
Right.
if
Unbelievable. Yeah.
or you don't have a system in place to just answer the phone? But they're the most basic part. All right. Of the 12 that picked up the phone, how many would you guess could even answer my question? My question number 1, when? Question number 2, membership plan.
How many of them looked at you or said, "What are you talking about?" Again, we have one in our office, and it's such a great thing to offer. But I'm gonna say, and again, I feel like every office should have one. But 2, was it 2?
Yeah, it was. That's amazing. Okay. Nice job.
Yeah.
Nice guess. So I got assistants, I got a hygienist, I got lots of front desk people, and only 2 of the 12 even knew the answers to 1 and 2. Now, to be fair, the assistants and hygienists I got, they had no idea about the scheduling, right? So that's where that fell apart with some of them. And then a lot of the front desk people were like, ooh, it was a lot of humming and hemming and high. And anyway, it was kind of entertaining. So the original question was, what if I'm not sure if I want to own a practice? Here's my advice. Go shadow a few dentists that own their practice.
Mm-hmm.
Then ask yourself, could I do at least as good as that dentist?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the answer might be, I'm not sure, or I don't think so, or I don't want that responsibility. If that's you, there is nothing wrong with you. And I would love to be your patient because you're clearly very dedicated to your craft. And maybe you're not in it as much for the money. Maybe you just love dentistry. Maybe you have other priorities in life. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that answer. But for the vast majority of dentists out there, they have a sense they want to own. They don't like being told what to do clinically by someone else. And they're just a little bit nervous about dentistry. I would just say, oh my dear gosh, the bar is so low out there in terms of ownership that yes, you can absolutely be an owner, and chances are very, very good you'll be at least as good as the person you're buying from, if not significantly better. And we could go on and on, Eric. No dentist that I've been to, I'm almost 40 years old. No one's ever explained to me what a cavity is. No one's ever told me why they'd want to save my tooth. No one's ever told me what the difference between a crown and an implant is. I know those things because I've picked up on them by being in the industry. But I've been to 3 orthodontists now with my kids. Every freaking orthodontist sits down, says, yep, great. See you in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And I'm sitting there as a parent going, how are things looking, doc? Right. We got how many more visits? We've been coming. Anyway, don't get me started on the business side and how low hanging the fruit is in terms of just the very, very basics of customer service. I'm not talking clinical skills. I'm talking basic customer service. Anyway, the bar's so low. If you think you want to own, you're probably fine. Go do it.
So to all those potential, associates that are thinking about buying, you can do this. And like I was saying earlier, I wish I made the move years ago, and I don't think I could ever be an associate again. There's nothing like being a business owner. Yeah, there's a lot of stresses, which I want to go into with you after. But once you do make that purchase, it's a whole different world when you're an owner. You don't just leave that office, after you see those patients. You're dealing with the staff, you're dealing with the business, you're dealing with insurance, HR, all that stuff. So there is a lot to learn, and they don't teach you any of this in dental school. You have to learn it, by doing your research and finding a good mentor, or you learn it through, coaches or on your own. So, what about urban, rural, suburban? Is there a trend where, like in the real estate market, that people are moving out of the city and purchasing more in either rural or suburban areas?
Yeah, the trend tends to be away from urban, more towards suburban and rural. And the general trend that rural practices tend to make more money and have lower overhead is accurate.
Hmm.
What I would say though is it almost doesn't matter. Okay, now I'm gonna take off my transition hat and I'm gonna put on my financial planner accountant hat to answer this.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna say, listen, as a dentist, regardless of if you own a practice or you're an associate, regardless if you own in a city or the suburbs or out in farm country somewhere, chances are your family's going to ask you for money. You're picking up the check for dinner, and you're going to be wealthy no matter where you land. All right. Relatively speaking, right? Are you comparing yourself to other dentists now or oral surgeons, or are you just comparing yourself to the population? Relatively speaking, what I would say is if you literally have no preference whatsoever on where you practice, I think you're the only person on the planet who has no preference. But if that's true, fine, go rural, go, ex-urban, suburban, something like that if you want to make more money. But I would just say, if you want to live somewhere, go live somewhere and find a practice in the place you want to live that has the
Hmm.
characteristics, family or weather or, distance to relatives or hiking or whatever it is that you love to do. There are dental practices all over the country. You can find a good one almost anywhere.
Yeah, personally, I'm in Acton, which is right near Concord, about
Yeah,
30
I know
minutes
right where that
outside of
is.
Boston,
Yep.
and it's a great community. It's all about the school system and the community, and I live in the town that I practice in, which may not be for everyone because you see patients at the grocery store, and I all my kids classmates, I see their parents everywhere. But it's a great practice builder because I'm in the community, and I've gotten so many patients just from being in the community. Um, that personally has worked out well for me. Now I can actually go to the grocery store though with a mask and hat on, and no one knows who I am. So that's kind of cool. One of the silver linings of COVID. Um, but uh, so, do you find that there's more rural practices available because of maybe the DSOs aren't purchasing those as much? Um,
No.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but no, that's generally not been the case. DSOs have tended to focus more on major metro areas
Mhm.
simply for the or not the demographics, the geographical factor that if you can have 12 in, Seattle and Bellevue, you can get to all 12 of them pretty fast. And
Right.
if you have 12 locations spread across North and South Dakota, it's going to take you a lot longer to visit all of them, to manage all of them, things like
Yep.
that. So I think no is the short answer to that question.
What about the baby boomer effect? If I was 68, 70 years old and I had to deal with all the PPE like you were saying, I probably would have just said, screw it, I'm out of here and I'm going to sell. Have you noticed that trend?
Yeah, there is definitely that trend. It's being offset by the millennial trend, right? So there are more millennials on a
Hmm.
proportional basis than there were baby boomers, if you study the stats and demographics. So right as you're seeing more people retire and hang up the handpiece in dentistry, you're seeing an influx in dental students and people that are looking to own. So those are tending to offset each other a little bit. If maybe having a few more buyers than there were sellers. The other factor you didn't mention is the baby boomer effect. I would I would I like to joke that dentists should just go in their backyard with a briefcase full of cash, and they should just burn the first $50,000 that they save, because that's going to be a safer investment than the first $50,000 that they invest somewhere. And that's going to be true for a lot of the baby boomers. You're seeing the stats. You can look up the studies through the ADA about the average retiring age of dentists for males is now over 70. It's 70.2 or something. For females, it's still 62.9. But those are the, now we're seeing over 50% of dental students are now female. And so those demographic trends are going to shift and change a little bit. And anyway, the average US person retires around 64.8, right? So dentists are sticking around 5-ish or a little bit more years longer than the average American. And I got to think that has to do partially with lifestyle, partially with their, how much money they've saved. And just the fact that a lot of times your ego and your identity is wrapped up in the fact that, how you introduce yourself. Hi, my name is Dr. Eric Block. I'm a dentist, right? And what do you say after you're not a dentist anymore? And there's some emotional and psychological hangups around that as well.
So how many kids do you have?
We have 4.
Okay. So you're never going to retire.
Yeah, it's true. Especially if they go to college. We'll just pick our favorite, and that one gets to go to college.
That one gets to go. I mean, I have a 5 and 7-year-old, and by the time they're in college, it's going to be like $150,000 a year. So I'm banking on the tennis scholarship, but
I'm banking on disruption in the higher education industry, and I'm hoping COVID is a catalyst.
I know something's got to happen. Okay, so we found the right type of practice or location. What about the valuation process? Is cash king? Is cash flow king? Is that a major factor in purchasing the practice?
Yeah, the 2 factors you're going to look at are collections and profitability, which lead to cash flow. Okay, and you asked when folks get me involved. This is about the time folks get me involved. I have a lot to say. I've got some great resources on how to find a practice. But finding a practice is a lot like finding a spouse. It's very personal. It's very individual. There are some general trends, right? Create relationships, talk to lots of people, but everybody's story is going to be a little bit different. And by the time brokers get a hold of practices, if you're counting on just sitting in your pajamas and browsing listings online and finding your dream practice, it can happen. It's very unlikely to happen in the time frame you want it to happen. So yeah, when you found that practice, the analysis really does come down to both the qualitative. Do you want to live in this place? Do you like the office? Does it have some of the number of operatories, space, the things that you want out of your office? And then do the numbers work? And in a lot of cases, it does come down just to, are collections high enough and is overhead low enough to give you enough cash flow to justify the risk and additional headache of taking on ownership. So some general rules of thumb here would be, I like to point folks towards practices that collect $800,000 or more. Right? And that's just for simple math. If the practice collects $800,000, a couple things happen. First, you have a dedicated patient base, trained staff that know at least somewhat what they're doing, whether or not they know if there's an in-office membership plan or not. Let's set that aside for a second. But so you've got the foundational pieces of a good practice to buy, and then if practice overhead is 60%, give or take, right, and that leaves you with 40% on a practice collecting to 800. 80 times 4 is $320,000. So 320 minus your practice loan payment minus some taxes leaves you in a pretty good place as an owner to be able to afford, relative to an associateship somewhere, justifying bringing on the risk and the debt of practice ownership. So that's a very, very rough, quick and dirty version. Of course, there are a lot of nuances in terms of staff costs and supply costs and how much is the rent. I mean, you can get very detailed, but that's a very high level. Does that help?
Yeah. So, it is kind of like, finding that practice, like finding a spouse. However, I did meet my wife on eHarmony. So
nice. Yeah, there you go.
I saw her pictures. She looked hot, and I emailed her. It turned out she was a really great person too. So that worked out. But what about the difference in like a fee for service um, practice versus a heavy PPO or HMO? Do you find that there's more cash flow with a fee-for-service type practice, or do they all just range? They're all different.
Tend to range. That tends to be more of a qualitative, what do you want out of your practice type of question. So I don't see big differences in profitability. I do see big differences in how busy the office is, right? If you're a heavy PPO Medicaid type practice, you're writing off a lot of your production, therefore your schedule is busier to keep you at a collections level commensurate to a strictly fee-for-service practice. However, right, the flip side of that is you got to hustle to find and keep your patient base, and in a transition, your risk is a lot higher, right? They really like Eric. He's my fee-for-service doc. I see him at the grocery store. Now, who's this new gal? Who's this new guy? I don't know them, right? And then that, do I start looking around? So having a really good transition plan in a fee-for-service office is really important. But, to your question about the numbers, not huge differences other than scheduling and, why do patients come to that office? Is it because the insurance company said that this is a good office, or is it because they Googled you and see that you do sedation, or you give me a foot massage or whatever during the during the procedure or whatever?
I'm gonna have to start adding that to my practice.
Probably some.
So along with fee for service, does, like you were saying, I want to get into this maybe just a little bit later, but a high fee for service practice does come with the risk of attrition, where and maybe this is again where that membership plan comes in to keep that loyalty to the practice, but patients may leave. What is the attrition rate typically for like a fee for service versus a PPO type office?
Yeah, I've got some numbers here for you. So I've got the average attrition rate now for my clients. Okay, so do with that what you will. But before I give you that number, anytime you're doing an analysis on a practice, what I do with my clients is I give them, hey, here's what I think's going to happen. All right. Now, here's what would happen with your numbers and your take-home pay if 5% of the patients didn't show up. Here's what's going to happen with the numbers if 10% of the patients don't show up, right? And we're looking at the sensitivity analysis to say, all right, most likely case is here, but if the worst happens, can I live with that? And if the answer is no, I can't live with that, maybe take a pause, and maybe that's not the practice for you. But anyway, every practice you look at, you should always do that sensitivity analysis, because you never know. But here's the interesting fact. Now that I've said that and scared you a little bit, the average attrition rate is actually negative 2%. Think about that. That's a double negative, meaning the average attrition isn't attrition at all. It's actually addition. Okay. And here's why. All right. And then once you think about it, it makes sense. You've got, in most cases right now, so this is a median, right? We're talking standard bell curves and, standard deviations and all that. But the median attrition rate is a negative because you got a seller who, in most cases, hung on a little too long, maybe took their foot off the gas a little bit, maybe wasn't as careful in who they hire, how they manage, type of advertising you do. And then you get a buyer that's young, energetic, hungry, advertising, paying really close attention to the patients, and the word starts to spread, and you actually see more patients show up to the practice. So that's a good news story for buyers, with the caveat that that's just a median number, and everybody's situation is a little bit unique.
I want to kind of finish phase 2 here of the buyout process. We found the right office. You helped with the bank loans. What else goes along with it? I'm sure there's a lot of documents to be signed. How long does that actual we valued the practice, we made the agreement, that process take before I can actually be approved and start working in that and being the owner? How long does that take?
Median amount of time between finding a practice and getting the keys to the front door and taking ownership of the practice is between 2.5 and 3 months. All right, give or take. And again, we got some meetings, can definitely go faster. Usually not much faster than 6 weeks. That's kind of the quickest, generally speaking, although there are exceptions to that rule. And then, some go out 4 or 5, some are a lot longer than that. And, but the median's probably around 2 or 3 months. in terms of the general basic major milestones in the process, finding the practice, analyzing the practice with hopefully yourself or with some help, somebody like me. The next major step would be sending a letter of intent, which is, it's nothing more than a document that outlines the basic deal points where you, with a signature, essentially shake hands and agree to a price and timing. And then from there, it's usually 6 to 8 to sometimes 10, 12 weeks to go through due diligence, get the bank loans in place, have the lawyers send documents back and forth, and then, close on the practice.
Now, do you guide the buyer through all that? Do you get them set up with a lawyer?
Everything. Yeah, I do everything in the process with the exception of the legal side. So between me and an attorney, we can get a buyer all the way through the process. But yeah, all the way through, once the lawyers start talking, the bank loan is in place, I'll help them analyze and select, the best bankers at the best banks and make sure they get the best terms and rates and all those things. And then I have a whole checklist I walk my buyers through to get them ready to own a practice. Right, because I used to live in that world. So we're talking merchant services, accounting, taxes. Do you have a bank account? Did you call the insurance companies and get credentialing going? Do you have an NPI-2 number? Do you have an employee manual? Right, there's a long list of. I have 150 some odd things on my checklist we walk through together. And if I can do it for them, things like IRS filings, I will. In a lot of cases, I'm taking off the accountant hat and I'm putting on the consultant hat, and I'm walking them through. All right, when you call the payroll company, here's what you got to tell them. Things like
that. Now, is the biggest headache the insurance credentialing? Is that something you really have to start early?
Yeah, I think that would be fair to call that the biggest headache. Yeah, I'm trying to think. If I think of another biggest headache, I'll let you know. But that probably is right up there. And the reason is just because timing and every insurance company is a little bit different in how they do the process. 3 months is, again, kind of a median, and a lot of buyers will close on their practice while they're still waiting to be in network with an insurance company. Now, there are some folks out there, and if you need a recommendation, I know several of them that actually that's all they do is they help buyers both go through credentialing and this is the important thing in my mind, is they will negotiate with the insurance companies to get higher rates on, crowns and fillings and all that. And usually those negotiators will pay for themselves, right? Yep. If I can get $850 instead of $800 on a crown, that very quickly pays for itself. And there's some folks that help with that.
I think that's so important to get that specialist that can come in and negotiate for you before you take ownership. Okay, so we've gone through the actual purchase. What about day one? I've just started. I'm now the owner, and my what about onboarding the staff? My assistant's crying in the lunchroom. Do I call you and you talk to her? Do you leave me alone? Can I call you anytime?
Call me anytime.
I'm asking because the transition for me, I came out of there like a bat out of hell, and I wanted to do all these changes and I had all these ideas, and I wasn't very good at the onboarding process. I just wanted everyone to do everything the way I wanted to do it, and
paid $1 million for something. They need to fall in line, right?
That was not the right way to go. So how do you help the new purchase owner go through that post-purchase process?
Yeah, I follow up with them. My engagements end the day of closing, but I am available for help and support after closing. I'll never disappear from my clients. The way that I help is I coach them up before closing date and help them realize. So I go through a lot of the details that it sounds like you lived through painfully. I'm very clear with the clients that I work with that, how to set up the first meeting with the staff, what the agenda should look like, how to take notes, the types of topics to bring up. And then, by the way, I'll have here's what you tell the staff, and then here's you and we're going to have a real heart-to-heart discussion. And the main thesis of that discussion is change nothing for 90 days. Okay. Yep. 3 months. Here's, I call it a delta file. Okay. Delta is the mathematical symbol for change, right? So stick I've got a little Moleskine notebook. You can have a text file on your phone. anytime you see something that you're like, oh man, I'm going to change that,
Hmm.
scratch the itch, write it down, type
Write it
it in your
down.
phone. But other than maybe the pension and maybe doing one-on-ones with your employees, change nothing. And the reason is in order to go fast in business, you have to go slow with people, right? You have to say things a lot of times, you have to explain, you have to do things. And yet you've learned that lesson now.
Yeah.
And anyway, so yes, coach all my buyers through that. We cover it in exhaustive detail prior to closing. So hopefully that transition period, they can focus on the staff, they can focus on the patients, and there are fewer employees crying in the break room.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice, that do nothing, and when you do start to change things, do it slowly. Like you said, wait that 90 days, do things slowly, because people fear change and staff fears change. And a lot of these, I find such a difference with staff that I've hired versus inherited staff. You know, inherited staff, some of them were there longer than me. So change can be difficult for people. So you have to be really careful in how you do implement change, and you really have to explain the why you are doing some changes. So this, I mean, I could talk to you for hours because I find this so important for those young dentists that are looking to make that next step to become a practice owner. Do you have any last words of wisdom or any last nuggets that you want to tell those young dentists out there?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate, if you think you want to own, do it. Do it sooner than you think. And if
Mm-hmm.
you would like some help, I'd be honored to help and be considered, but it's not required, to call someone like me. You can absolutely do this. The course is a great option. There are a lot of resources, out there. I think my main advice is, while there are resources like me out there, the biggest impediment is probably you and your own brain. You're more scared than you need to be, and you can absolutely do it. You could be one of the two offices that pick up the phone and bring me and my cash
Yep.
paying family in as patients, and we'd be
Yep.
happy to see you.
Yep. You can do this. And I think, like you said, start early, prepare early, network, meet as many people as possible, and start your preparation early. All right. So go to Deals for Dentists. Brian Hanks, he's got a free authored copy of the book How to Biodental Practice, normally $19.99, just cover printing and shipping. And also $300 off the Practice Purchase Blueprint. If you go to Deals for Dentists, this course sells normally for $9.97 online, but if you enter the code DEALS, you get 30% off. So that's $300 savings. So thanks so much, Brian. That was really insightful, and maybe we can be in touch in the next 6 months or so and find out what's new in the practice buying world.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, thanks so much. Take care.